Okay, well, let's get started. Let's see. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We have quite a few people who are still coming in, but I think we should probably get started. We are very excited about today's discussion because we are joined, we at the Intellispark team are joined by an incredibly inspiring and impactful leader, Dr. Brian Creasman, who has informed me that I shall know him as Brian, just as he asked all of his students to call him Brian. So I'm going to stay in line as a good student. Brian is the superintendent of the Fleming County Schools in Kentucky, and he is the 2020 Kentucky Superintendent of the Year. We are very confident you will come away from today's webinar invigorated by Brian's energy and ideas, as well as by those of our guests. We're looking for input from those of you who are on the call, some of your ideas as well. So this is truly a community effort. As we've all witnessed, the COVID-19 pandemic has forced incredible amounts of change on every member of the education ecosystem without warning and without time for planning. And it has truly been a crucible moment for educational leaders. In two of Brian's recent blogs, he distills some learnings from his own crucible of leadership into the F.A.C.T.S, which he spells out F.A.C.T.S, and we'll give you a little tutorial on that in a moment. But these facts are guiding Brian down this uncharted path of educational transformation. And today we'd like to give you the opportunity to share some of your own essential learnings and those of your organization, and consider the implications of these learnings for the fall, whether you expect to find your students and educators in the physical classroom or not. Brian will bring to life what some of these learnings will mean for his organization, his district in practice for the fall. Before I begin, I do want to thank Brian for joining us on this webinar. It's an incredibly busy time for educators, especially for leaders. I also want to thank John Fisk, my colleague, who will help me to moderate today's session. I will let Brian and John introduce themselves in a moment, but first I just want to go through a couple of quick housekeeping details. My name is Patricia Gagnon, and I'm the Senior Vice President for Programs and Practice at Intellispark. This means I'm intensely focused on the array of strategies that schools are deploying to drive student success. I work with schools to, as they come on board with Intellispark program, and together with John, I will be moderating this session. By now, probably many of you have been spending a lot of time in Zoom, so you probably know where to find chat, but chat will be important during this discussion because we really do want to ask you some questions, get some of your input, and we'll be pausing to take some of your questions as well during this discussion. So if you could go over to the chat box, if you haven't done so already, it's either at the bottom or to the right of your screen. And if you could just let us know, again, where you're joining us from today and what your role is in your organization, whether it's a district, a school, another organization. We'd love to know where folks are coming in from today. Nice blend. We've got Kentucky represented, Pennsylvania, Minnesota. New Hampshire, school administrators, school psychologists, Nevada City, California, rather. Assistant principal from Chicago. Great to see we've got multiple time zones represented here. Some more from the Northeast. Well, welcome. And a great mix of roles as well. Very excited to see that. This should be a rich discussion. So as I said, we will have some time for Q&A at the end for people who would like to stay on the call. And after the webinar, we will send out some key takeaways as well as information about additional blog posts and future webinars. So keep an eye out for that. Okay, if we can move on to the next slide. Actually, probably two slides. Okay, so actually, if we can go back to our agenda. Again, the agenda, Brian and John will give an introduction, and I've asked in this introduction that Brian give us a little background about the journey he's taken in his school district. He's had a lot to overcome in taking on and leading this district, not only recently, but just the evolution that all leaders have in their district. So I've asked Brian to give a little bit of that background. And then after that, we will dive right into the conversation and have some Q&A following that. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Brian to give us a little bit of background about you and your role at Fleming County Schools.
So Patricia, thanks for having me. And as I always start, I have the best job in Kentucky as superintendent of Fleming County Schools. I've been here since September of 2014. Like Patricia said, it has been somewhat of a roller coaster ride. When I arrived, we were in a state managed situation where we were not state managed. We were one step below that at state monitoring. And 2 years later, in 2017, we were able to exit that state monitoring status, and we've really grown since then. We are consistently rank in the top districts for teaching and learning, for financial stability, and all the other metrics. We typically rank in the top 50, and there's 172 school districts in Kentucky. So we went from somewhere near the end, towards the end, to near the top, and we continue to push towards the top. But a little bit about my background: I'm not a native Kentuckian. I'm from North Carolina. I've been a teacher. I've been an assistant principal at a middle school, a principal of a middle school, and a high school principal and assistant superintendent.
Thank you so much, Brian. Incredible trajectory. And to John.
Hi, everybody. My name is John Fisk. Good to see some of you folks who joined us last time. I'm the Vice President of Business Development at Intellispark. So I help all our partner schools and districts across the US. And today, like our last event, I will be monitoring the chat box. So we are going to ask questions as we go through the presentation today. We would love to hear your thoughts, and we will try and include those in our discussion. So please, write your thoughts and answers in the chat box. You can either choose to the panelists, or you can write to panelists and attendees. Either way works for us. And it's my pleasure to be here today, and we look forward to the conversation. So thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. So let's move right into our discussion now. Next slide. And actually, I'm going to bounce right into the following slide because I thought maybe some of you would like some cheat notes. So as I mentioned before, Brian has very beautifully distilled some of his learnings into the F.A.C.T.S, F-A-C-T-S. And, what we'd like to kind of focus on today is how have these facts guided some of the key learnings that will help schools plan for the fall and then be successful in the fall. So if people could just place in the chat some thoughts about what have you learned, what have been some key learnings this spring related to faith, aspiration, compassion, transparency, and service that have been very impactful for you and your team and your students that will guide you into the fall. How have these elements been important to you? We'd love to hear from those of us who are attending. Remote learning is a one student at a time process. It really is. It's a question of engaging each student and helping them learn. Hard time, but all good now. Hard time hearing, but all good now. Okay, sorry. Thank you very much. The more face time you can have with students to create the human connection, the better. Absolutely. The power of connection is so critical in the online space, in the remote learning situation. Were there any other learnings related to these facts? Flexible scheduling is important, and later hours. Yes, I've absolutely been hearing parents wanting later hours so that they can be there to support their students when they're not doing their day job. Clear expectations for teachers and students, absolutely, more so than ever. By using those facts and better communicating with parents about the missed special education timelines, we've avoided conflicts from parents feeling we have forgotten their kids. Absolutely, the power of communication, and I think Brian's going to dive into that. So Brian, if you would, you know, I know that we don't have, there probably have been some moments that were crystallizing for you this spring. And I'm wondering if you can highlight some of those that you expect will be guiding your team as far as the facts are concerned.
And Patricia, I think one of the first key lessons that we carry forward is that education can transform. Constructs bend. And typically a transformation takes 3 to 5 years. Many of the districts across the nation, just like here in Fleming County, we had to transform in 3 to 5 days. So we've really proven that it can, but the key element that we picked up on, and it's a key lesson, is constructs can bend if we really have a compelling and why, and we communicate the why we had to change. So we've got to continue carrying that forward. And also, I think the social and emotional no longer was just a buzzword. I think a lot of districts were doing lip service about social and emotional, but really that came to the forefront with especially with the remote learning and as a result of COVID-19, that we had to really move that to the forefront, that ultimately that it was that social emotional piece for the students that really drove a lot of our decisions here in Fleming County. One of the things that I communicated early on was that our level of success in Fleming County, at that time we did not know that the state accountability, the state assessments would be canceled. But one of the things that we really stressed as a team here in Fleming County was that our success was going to be measured by if we got every student, every staff member, and every parent through this successfully. And that was how we were going to measure success. And what did that take? We had to pull out all the stops. We just did what was best for the students, making contact. And I think I was taking notes through all of those great comments that, you know, it is about that one student, building those relationships with that student at a time. We also learned that parents do want to be engaged, but we have to make opportunities that sometimes may be inconvenient for us, but convenient for the parent. A lot of our parents were still working, so we had to make sure that we could engage with them maybe after work, making sure that Johnny and Sally was still doing work. So our calls may have happened near the end of the evening instead of during the day. But, you know, that notion that, you know, our parents and guardians don't want to be involved, I think we've proven that, hey, not only do they want to be involved, they want to be engaged. And without parents and guardians, Patricia, this time, a lot of school districts would have failed miserably because they became yes, we still had teachers, but they became the facilitators of the learning for many of our students in the district and across the nation. They were they were the middleman for a lot of teaching and learning, and they did a great job. You know, districts need to reach out and give them a high five because, you know, students may have earned an A, but man, you know, parents earned an A too for their not only participation but engagement in helping us bring off this huge task of teaching remotely. And Fleming County had not really delved into remote learning like many districts across the nation. So we had to learn and we had to have their help. And, you know, the other thing is what we saw with the teaching and learning, Patricia, is teachers were really emphasizing students being students, kids being kids, and they were assigning work for students to go outside and play, to exercise, things like that. That we typically we see a decrease in that in our traditional school. Since 2001, we know nationwide that PE and recess has been reduced by 40%. However, with remote learning, we've seen an increase in that. So we've got to carry that forward, that yes, if PE and recess was important during the school closure of COVID-19, I think they're still important moving forward.
Brian, if I could ask, I hate to interject because I know you have so much to share, but I'm just curious. I know that I've heard that sometimes staff think, okay, what do I have permission to do? Because their instinct so often is they know these students so well and they know what students need, but they're not always confident that, they're allowed to your point, bend the constructs. So to what degree did you as a leader have to unleash and encourage people to bend the construct, or to what degree was that already part of the culture of your program?
Yeah, so we, since 2014, we've really put the philosophy student-centered, teacher-driven education. Even though we have a standardized curriculum, we really encourage teachers to take risk, and we will be there to catch them if they fail, and applaud them if they succeed. And that's one of the things we stressed early on, Patricia, is that we've got to think differently. We are none of us are familiar with remote learning. We had 3 to 5 days to put this together and get it launched. So we had to really reiterate that level of empowerment, teacher empowerment, and that teacher innovativeness, really thinking outside the box. And I think, we saw teachers do so many fabulous things that, I think everyone should be, all teachers should be teachers of the year for what they did.
You also mentioned that one of your objectives was to ensure everybody came through this with, successfully, students, parents, and teachers. And I have to imagine that unleashing people to do what they felt was right also invigorated people a little bit, where they needed energy, where they could have been just sapped by this whole change.
Yeah. So I think as leaders, our job is during a crisis is to lower anxiety and provide a vision. And that's one of the things, especially with the faith and aspiration, that it is up to leaders to describe what the end of the tunnel looks like, and helping people, not necessarily giving them step-by-step on how to get there, but empowering people to get there, but not adding more anxiety. Remote learning, this COVID-19 was already had anxiety levels high. We did not need to add to that. We needed to somehow figure out how to lower that as leaders. And I think that giving the teachers the freedom to just do what students need, whether that is just talking to them on the phone, do that. Setting up Zoom meetings or Google Hangout meetings. I think that's, I think we kept stressing the teachers and principals do what is needed. And I think that we've got to carry that forward, that, we did, I think for the most part, all districts across the nation did a fantastic job considering the circumstance. How can we improve on that? And how can we take those lessons and take it back to that traditional learning?
Yeah, no, I think that exactly meeting people where they are and letting them, humanize the experience and trust their instincts leads to better solutions for everyone. I'd like to shift gears just a little bit and maybe go to the next slide. You know, exactly as you're saying, how does this allow us to take these learnings and re-envision what can be over the horizon in such a way that it gives us some optimism about what is to come? And I know that that's a big theme for you, is like there's cause to be you know, energized by this change. So I'd like to just ask folks, you know, are there any big changes that they reimagine for school in the fall and perhaps ongoing? So just a couple of thoughts in the box, if people could share. Are there certain, you know, significant items that they've learned that are going to help them reimagine education? What will it look like in the fall that's different from the past? I know that's a very big, bold question, and I know Brian has some thoughts on it, but you know, everyone comes at this from a slightly different angle. So just curious, how are you reimagining school for the fall? Okay, Brian, why don't we dive in?
Yeah. So that's a big question.
Sure is.
But I think you start, Patricia, with the opportunity that we have. One, we have our students and our staff back. I mean, that should be cause for optimism right there. But the other thing is, I think this could be our moonshot moment in education. I know we use moonshot moments for medical research, and this past weekend with us going back to space as a nation. But this could be our moonshot moment where we can really transform education to better meet the needs of our students. Our student needs are diversifying more and more rapidly. And so, you know, we had, if we think back into March or April, whenever your district had to go into remote learning, our job was trying to figure out how to meet the needs of all of our students. Some of our students, obviously, there was equity issues with remote learning, so we met them at their need. Some got learning packets, hard copy learning packets. Some got computers, and some used their phones. But we were interested in trying to figure out addressing the equity issue. So we can still do that in the fall, understanding our students. And I think it goes back to what one of the attendees says. It has to be drilled down to that student, understanding each student, knowing the student's value in the educational process. And I think we've got to constantly become more adaptable. And the more adaptable we are, the more we can, meet the growing needs, not just of our students, but our teachers. We know that in August or April, August or September, when your school starts back, we think that the COVID-19 shutdown was difficult. I'm arguing that this reopening is going to be more difficult. So we are going to have to really utilize our skills that we learned or acquired back in the spring to really build those relationships even stronger with our students and our staff, understanding their needs. Most people are fearful of what's not only of the unknown, but of COVID-19 and other issues. So as leaders, we have to understand that, but that only starts by understanding the needs and building those relationships. And I think that takes me to the third point is with COVID-19, we recognize that for some of us, or that it's about the people, it's not about the process. So when we started out and we defined our level of success in Fleming County, that our success was going to be determined if we can get every student, every staff member, and every parent through this healthy, we made it about the people. And then it became about the process. How are we going to do that? Sometimes, too often, Patricia, I think we start with the process and then include the people. And really next year, the 2020-2021 school year, it's going to be about people. It's not going to be about the process. We've got to figure out how to get keep people engaged, students, and how to keep parents engaged. Because I would argue that the unknown for the fall is far greater than the unknown that we experienced back in March.
Right. Well, and you've talked about that, is that right now everyone's been away, and now you're going to have probably a hybrid of some sort. And when you talk about people before the process, it brings me to personalization. So often we've talked in education about the need to personalize the experience, and I think this spring has forced this personalization because we needed to understand how every child was doing, every educator was doing, and make sure that we could find a solution for them. I'm curious, in the fall, I would imagine what will be a challenge is how do you maintain that personalization when you have maybe some fragmented approaches? You're going to have this approach, and this approach. Do you foresee any major challenges or solutions for addressing that need to maintain personalization?
Yeah, so Patricia, back in March, so every week, all of our schools have weekly PLCs where administrators work with teachers. But what we did was we took that framework, that process, and made it more personable, meaning that we, instead of focusing on academic data, we focused on social emotional data. In our weekly PLCs, and we modeled that from the district level. So we met with principals weekly to make sure everything was okay. So we modeled the expectation that principals should also be touching base with teachers weekly, and teachers touching base actually more 2 or 3 times weekly with students. But what it was, we were focused on the personal aspect. We were personalizing education by making contact, engaging with each staff member, with each student, and working out solutions for that. And I think we've got to do the same thing in the fall, because I think, as you mentioned, and I agree, there's going to be more, everyone was on remote learning, right? In March or April, whenever. This time it's going to look different. You're going to have some students on remote learning, some students in a traditional, some doing hybrid. So making sure that personal relationship, it's going to be key. It's going to be what I term vision critical going forward.
Well, that brings me to our last focus question, which was, what are the guiding pillars that will help us overcome these expected and unexpected challenges in the months ahead? So,
I just want to call out some things that I saw in the chat box, which I think.
Oh, fabulous! Yes, please.
Yeah, fit this question here. So Molly says that they're going to start with social and emotional learning this fall, and that's going to be a key pillar for their school and district. And then Richard said that they'll be focusing on MTSS as well, which also involves social and emotional learning and making sure that there's a team and personalized supports in place for each student. So those are just 2 things. And then if anybody else who is attending would like to write in some of their guiding pillars for the fall, we can discuss those and also hear what Brian has to say about his plans as well.
So one of the first pillar that we are really focusing on is understanding the pulse of the community. We do a lot of things good, I think we do this very well, and we really gauge the pulse of the community on a lot of our decisions as a district. So if you're a principal or a district administrator, and you don't know the pulse of your community in regards to COVID-19 or reopening or other aspects of the teaching and learning process, you're really behind the 8 ball. And that goes back to the transparency piece, that we utilize a lot of surveys. We talk a lot to stakeholders. We have a lot of committees that we utilize that's made up of different stakeholder groups. And this week I'm meeting with teachers, and I'm also meeting with students, trying to understand a little bit about what they're thinking about in the fall. The other pillar that we're really focused on is meeting the diverse needs of our students and staff. How do you do that? Like you said, Patricia, when it's going to be fragmented. There's going to be different students over here, students over there, staff also. So how do we meet those needs, accommodate those needs, and keep learning moving forward? And then the other piece that we continue to go back in Fleming County is our vision. And that goes back to, that faith and the aspiration that in Fleming County, our vision is to be a district of distinction, that we want to be distinctive in what our approach to the teaching and learning process. That includes having the best relationships, the best engagement, and really providing the best resources and supports. So we've got to stay true to that. This is not about just checking a box to meet state or federal requirements. We've got your school, our district, or your organization, you have to remain true to your mission or vision. You've got to know your purpose, you've got to know your North Star, and working around that.
Absolutely. And, related to your point about bringing people with you by asking their question, soliciting their input, acknowledging where maybe something didn't go well, or maybe you want to tweak something, and letting them know that they're coming along with you, you're coming with them, not just when August and September hits, but start it now. Bring them along through this process to allay concerns or concerns that they don't know the picture. There's a question in the chat box. How do you attract, I just lost that for a second. How do you draw people to this plan and have them see it as positive if it means more work is required at home? So how do we accommodate, this reality that there is more now happening at home than ever before?
Yeah, and I think that question, you start always with the leader has to be optimistic. We have to see it as an opportunity to become better, to add value to the educational process. But as leaders, we also have to be able be the first to jump in, roll our sleeves up, and help. We've got to, whether that's with the students, whether that's with staff or with parents, if there's issues there, we've got to be able as leaders to model the way and rolling up our sleeves to try to help. If we designate that, or if we require that teachers to be designing lessons, then what can we be doing as leaders to help them? Could we be the ones who, like we did here, because we had remote learning through computer-based and remote learning through hard copy paper. So our role, obviously I am not a kindergarten teacher, and I don't think people want me to be a kindergarten teacher, but I could stuff envelopes. I could help mail the resources home. So that took the pressure off of teachers of having to design and also get them to the students. But I think that it doesn't happen overnight. Leaders have to build those relationships and model the way from starting now that to try to lower that anxiety level, because this is going to be very stressful. So we as leaders, we do not need to add anything to the plate. We need to figure out how we can, lessen the load and still meet the needs of our students and our staff.
We have two comments in the chat box here. So David from Kentucky is saying that one of their guiding pillars will be to provide professional development to their teachers, because a lot of them were used to designing instruction for face-to-face learning, and some of the instruction, this fall will most likely be face-to-face and remotely. And so they're working on training their teachers on how to design and deliver content through their, looks like their LMS platform.
Yeah, and John, I think that goes back to that second pillar, where we've got to meet our students and our teachers where they are. And it goes back to the other question. We've got to figure out a way to lessen that load. And if we can do a lot of stuff up front so that we're not like training up front, preparing for, most districts will experience sporadic shutdowns across the nation. Everyone is telling us this. So we've got to be prepared for that, but we do not need to wait around until 5 days, 5 days prior to it, and then expect teachers to, I think we only add to stress. And I also think the more we communicate about that now, the less stress parents will feel.
Absolutely. And, go ahead, John.
There's one more comment in the chat box about a key pillar for the fall, and it's related to the events, happening as we speak today. And so Molly's saying that we need to educate students about, how others should be treated with different backgrounds, and how we need to focus on, basically preparing our students for social and emotional, for these social and emotional situations, this fall and moving forward, so that we don't see history repeat itself again.
Yeah, Molly, one of the things in Fleming County 2 years ago, we are, I think, so there's 172 school districts here in Kentucky. We are one of 10 school districts. We are a rural school district, predominantly white, but we are one of 10 districts in Kentucky that has a true equity policy that really spells out what you're saying. And that really guided our work when we shut down in March, making sure that learning was as equitable as possible. And we're very proud of that. We've still got huge gaps because, again, the needs continue to diversify. And I think it's only increasing because of the COVID-19. So we've got to make sure that, again, as I mentioned, your North Star, your vision. Our vision requires us to be distinctive in delivering equitable learning.
Thank you so much, Brian, for sharing that example too, because, I think right now people are absolutely recognizing that there's certainly growing awareness of what's been out there for a long time and hasn't been addressed. And people are looking for ways to really integrate this into a time to really learn and change. So it's both awareness, but now it's how do we move from awareness into action. So that's right. a fantastic example. So I just want to be mindful of the time and make sure that if people do want to stay on for questions, others can drop if they need to, but I wanted to come to your summary slide, Brian, just because there is so much that everyone has learned, and it's hard to encapsulate it in a 30-minute conversation, but sometimes a few nuggets can help people lock and load on those takeaways. So if you could share these, that would be great.
Sure. obviously it's going to be our focus on faith, on vision and faith. We never lose sight of our vision to be a district of distinction. That drives everything we do. We are not about check boxes. We are about really pushing the envelope and trying to do what's best for students, and also really expressing that that sense of hope that we can and we will get through this together. That it's about everyone getting through this together and them working together to do that. Right now, leaders, we have to be, there is a hunger, an unyielding hunger for that visionary leadership right now that can really engage and move a school district. So I think that's one key takeaway as leaders. We really need to be doing that right now. The other thing is about engage, empower, and communicate. I cannot stress this enough that you really need to be gauging the pulse of your communities right now, understanding their fears, understanding their needs, understanding what they expect to happen in the fall, and really working to make sure that you're transparent with what your thoughts are going forward into the fall. And one of the things that we're doing is I will begin next week releasing food for thought. These are my thoughts moving forward, and sort of like a out loud thinking. And that way people see, see what I'm thinking about that. But one of the things I continue to stress, and I think I mentioned this in one of the blogs, this is not just a pandemic emergency, this is a communication emergency. That we've got to regularly communicate what's going on, and in order to keep people engaged. And in order to keep people engaged, they have to trust. And in order to trust, you have to be transparent. And you can't skip. It's all three. And I think that's, so as leaders, that's something to take away. And then embrace the opportunity for change. We have an unbelievable opportunity to create lasting change. I have a 6-year-old daughter, and I see how we can change this huge American icon called education. And we've got to really empower and ignite that, that sense of curiosity, that innovativeness, that creativity, and really trying to see if we can change, not see, but we can. We did it. We did it in 3 to 5 days, many of us, and really do that for our students. And I'm going to challenge you, and I'm going to challenge you leaders in Fleming County. Don't race back to normalcy. We're racing to something new. We're racing to something better, something more optimistic for every student. And we were focused on that in remote learning. We've got to carry that to traditional learning, making sure that every kid's needs, every kid's interest, every kid's goals and aspirations are at the forefront of the educational process.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that summary, Brian. And again, I just, I know there's so much behind these simple bullets, but I think what really was a learning moment for me was when you shared just how much you're doing now with your community to prepare them for fall. It's not something you start later. It's establishing that connection, nurturing that connection day in, day out. You don't have to have all the answers, but just sharing and getting feedback to what you're sharing has incredible power. And so people do come along with you on that. They're more likely to come along with you on that change.
Yeah,
when you do that.
It is not, leaders are not expected to have all the answers.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things I really stress to the community I may not have all the answers, but someone in the community or somewhere across Kentucky or somewhere in the nation, someone has an answer. And we've all got to work together to figure that out.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, well, thank you so much. I would love to let people know that if they need to move on, they are free to do so. But we do have some time for some additional questions if people would like to stay on for a little bit longer. And Brian has indicated he has a little bit more time to field questions from folks and additional thoughts. So as you're thinking of those questions, I'm going to hand over to John just to give you the lay of the land for going forward.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Tricia. So I just wanted to say thanks again to Brian for your time today and for talking with us about how you plan on transforming your district in the fall and some of the lessons that you've learned over the last few months. I also wanted to say thank you from Intellispark to everybody who has joined us today. We talk with educators every day, and we know that the fall will definitely be different, but that there's a huge chance for change. And we know that a lot of school districts are looking for ways to engage or re-engage their students and educators this fall. And we're here to help. And if you're interested in talking with us about ways that you can ensure that all your students are known, appreciated, and supported, that we would be more than happy to speak with you about that. A couple other things. We have a survey that will come up at the end of the webinar when you exit. So if you do have just like 15 seconds to fill that out, that would be great. And then we also have Brian's email listed down below. So if you'd like to get in touch with Brian, he's more than happy to speak with you about his plans for making his district a district of distinction and a lot of the change that they've undergone in the last few years, and then also his plans for the fall. And you can also connect with him on Twitter too. The last piece of follow-up is that I will be sending out the webinar recording. I know a few of you have asked for that and would be happy. So we'll be sending that over, and then the blogs that Brian has written that support this as well. So thanks again. And I will turn it back over to Tricia and Brian and see if we have any additional questions, and we'll call those out. And if not, then again, thanks so much. And we'll catch you all in the next webinar.
Yes, and I do want to thank people for the questions and the ideas as well in the chat box, because it really does enrich our discussion today. Let's see, do we have any other questions from folks for Brian? Doesn't look like we do. We still have some people here though, so.
Well, one last thing. We do have our next event coming up in 2 weeks. So I'll put that in the chat box too. That way, if anybody's interested, they can get that early, and then we'll be sending out an invite for that too. All right.
Well,
and then,
I think.
Yeah. I think it's probably safe.
Can you go over his, can you communicate, your mantra around transparency and the trust mantra again? So there were 3 pieces you mentioned, Brian, and you said, really, you can't skip one, that they all kind of need to move together in lockstep.
Yeah, so the biggest thing is, in order to communicate, you're seeking engagement, and if you're not transparent, you can't build trust, and you can't have transparency and trust if you don't communicate. And so you can't skip one. You can't be transparent if you're not communicating. Now that communicating doesn't mean that you're creating a memo or a press release every 5 minutes, but really, when you have information, share it, and really let people know, about the lessons learned, the mistakes happen, and some of your successes. And I think that just builds that level of transparency, which will help, lead to trust and more engagement of stakeholders.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And certainly more support.
Yeah.
More buy-in.
Yeah.
Yep.
Maybe we can include that in a follow-up for the attendees as well. So we can talk about that offline and then make
Well,
sure.
and I think you mentioned you had the quote the other day about they won't follow a leader around the corner.
Yeah. Yeah, Colin Powell said if people will not follow, soldiers will not follow generals if there's not a level of transparency and trust.
Mm-hmm.
And it's they will go into the darkest abyss if they trust you, but that requires communication and transparency.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Great.
Thank
Well,
you,
I think
Chad,
that's
for
a good place to end it. And I don't see any more questions coming through. So thanks so much for everybody, to everybody who has stayed on the line. And again, thanks so much, Brian. We really appreciate your time. And
Yeah.
I think it was very helpful for everybody. And Tricia, thank you so much too. And we will see you all next time.